In the heart of luxury, a storm brews as a black woman faces the brutal sting of racism. With a shocking slap and a humiliating eviction, hotel staff reveal their true colors. But the twist? She holds the key to the presidential suite, and she's not going down without a fight. Brace yourself for a tale of power, prejudice, and a turn that will leave you on the edge of your seat. The city was alive with energy. Cars honked, pedestrians bustled across the streets, and towering buildings reflected the afternoon sun. Amidst it all, Imani walked with a sea-cold confidence. She had been traveling all morning, soaking in the sights, but now she was exhausted. She needed a place to rest, somewhere comfortable, luxurious, and peaceful. Her eyes landed on the Grand Royale, one of the city's most prestigious five-star hotels. A towering structure of elegance. Its gold-plated doors shimmered under the bright daylight. The entrance was adorned with marble pillars, and finely dressed guests stepped in and out, some with designer luggage, others engaged in hushed conversations with chauffeurs and assistants. Imani smiled to herself. This would do perfectly. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and stepped inside. The lobby was breathtaking. A grand chandelier hung from the ceiling, illuminating the polished marble floors. The soft hum of classical music played from the ceiling, illuminating the polished marble floors. The soft hum of classical music played in the background, blending with the murmur of voices. The scent of fresh lilies filled the air, adding to the hotel's luxurious ambience. Everything about this place screamed wealth and prestige. And then standing behind the front desk was Calvin, a young man, just 25 years old, newly appointed to the Grand Royale as part of their reception staff. His neatly pressed uniform sat perfectly on him, his blonde hair slicked back, giving him a polished yet somewhat inexperienced look. He had only been working here for a week, and while he was eager to prove himself, there was one thing he despised: serving people he didn't believe belonged here. And to him, Imani was exactly that kind of person. His eyes followed her as she walked across the lobby. She wasn't dressed in the way he thought luxury guests should be. No designer labels, no extravagant jewelry, just a simple yet elegant outfit. And most importantly, her skin was black. Calvin's stomach twisted. A bitter taste filled his mouth. He straightened his posture and prepared for what he was certain would be a waste of time. Imani reached the reception desk and placed her hands gently on the polished counter. "Good afternoon," she said with a warm smile. "I'd like to book a room." Calvin didn't smile back. He barely acknowledged her presence before letting out a slow, exaggerated sigh. "This hotel is very expensive," he said flatly. Imani's smile didn't fade. She was used to subtle prejudice, but this wasn't subtle. She might immediately understood what was happening. "I can afford it," she said, maintaining her composure. "Just let me know what rooms are available." Calvin tilted his head, scanning her up and down. He didn't believe her. He had served wealthy clients all week, and they all fit a certain mold: white, privileged, covered in brands that screamed rich. Imani didn't fit that mold, and he hated it. "You sure about that?" he asked, leaning slightly over the counter. "Our cheapest room starts at $1,500 per night. You might be better off somewhere more suited for your kind." A beat of silence. Imani's fingers tapped the desk lightly. She could feel the judgment in his voice, the weight of his assumptions pressing down on her. "You're telling me I don't belong here," she stated. "Not a question. A fact." "I'm saying," Calvin replied with a smirk, "you should know your place." Her patience was thinning. She had faced racism before, but there was something particularly infuriating about being dismissed so easily. "Call your manager," she said. "I'd like to speak to them." Calvin scoffed. "You think I'm going to bother my boss for you?" His voice dropped to a mocking whisper. "Sweetheart, let me make this simple. People like you don't stay here. This hotel is for people with class, with money, with standards. You're just what?" Imani interrupted, her voice sharp. Calvin's smirk twitched. He hadn't expected her to challenge him. "Look," he said, straightening up, "I'm giving you a chance to leave before you embarrass yourself." I'm giving you a chance to leave before you embarrass yourself." "There's a cheap motel a few blocks down." Imani laughed, a short, sharp chuckle that caught him off guard. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" she said, crossing her arms. "The power trip, the idea that you get to decide who belongs here and who doesn't. You must feel important." Calvin's face darkened. He hated how sea-cold she was, how she wasn't backing down. "You don't want to belong here," he repeated, voice colder now. "And I don't have to serve you." Imani took a step closer. "Is that so?" Then she did something that changed everything. She reached out and tapped his name tag. Calvin snapped. His hand flew up, faster than even he expected. Crack! A sharp slap echoed through the lobby. The sound made a few guests turn their heads. The hotel staff behind the desk froze. Imani didn't flinch. Her cheek stung, but she didn't react. She just stared at him. Calvin, however, felt a sudden panic creep into his chest. He hadn't meant to hit her, or maybe he had. Either way, it had happened, and now she was just standing there, looking at him like he was beneath her. "You shouldn't have done that," Imani said quietly. Calvin clenched his jaw. "I told you to leave." Then he pushed her. Hard. Imani stumbled backward, her heel catching on the polished floor. She fell, her bag slipping from her shoulder, and then a small, sleek card slipped from her pocket, landing on the floor beside her. A black and gold keycard. Calvin barely noticed at first. He was still basking in the sick pleasure of kicking her out, until his eyes landed on the card, and then his breath caught in his throat. The presidential suite keycard. His face turned ghostly pale. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. This black woman he had just slapped, humiliated, and thrown out of the hotel. She owned the most expensive suite in the building. The ground beneath Calvin's feet might as well have disappeared. And then, as if the universe was sealing his fate, a deep, authoritative voice rang out from behind him. "What the hell is going on here?" The high hotel owner, Maxwell, had stepped into the scene. His sharp, calculating eyes took in the situation, Imani on the ground, the keycard beside her, and Calvin standing frozen like a man who had just signed his own death sentence. Maxwell's expression shifted from confusion to pure, unfiltered fury, and Calvin, for the first time in his life, he wished he could disappear. The entire hotel lobby seemed to freeze in time. Guests and staff turned their heads, their conversations fading into hushed whispers. The elegant setting, the grand chandelier, the marble floors, the golden accents, suddenly felt suffocatingly tense. Imani remained on the floor for a moment, her cheeks still burning from the slap, her arms slightly scraped from the fall. But her eyes? They burned with something else. Rage, not the kind that explodes instantly. The quiet, calculated kind, the kind that waits. Meanwhile, Calvin's entire world had collapsed in a second. His face had gone completely pale, his hands trembling slightly as his gaze locked onto the presidential suite keycard, lying beside Imani. But Teal. No, this had to be a mistake. He had just assaulted someone who was clearly an elite guest. He had ice-slapped and sat her. He had unpushed her. He had humiliated hides her. And now, he was about to face the consequences. Maxwell, the hotel owner, was furious. His footsteps were sharp and deliberate as he approached, his tailored suit rustling slightly as he moved. "What happened here?" His voice cut through the tension like a blade. Calvin's breath hitched. "Sir, Maxwell Lyon wasn't listening to him. His eyes were locked onto Imani, who was Matthew, slowly rising to her feet. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She took her time, dusting off her clothes with the Evelyn of a woman who refused to be broken. Then, without even glancing at Calvin, she bent down, picked up the key card, and held it up between two fingers. The gold accents gleamed under the chandelier light, and Maxwell's face darkened. Silence. Pure suffocating silence. Then Maxwell turned to Calvin, his voice dangerously sea-cold. "Did you put your hands on her?" Calvin's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His tongue felt too heavy. His mind raced, trying to find an excuse, a justification, anything that could save him. But there was nothing. Maxwell's expression became even colder. "Answer me." Calvin swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't know she was." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask if you knew who she was. I asked if you put your hands on her." Calvin's eyes darted around the lobby, looking for an escape. He saw guests watching. He saw hotel staff whispering. And then, he made the worst mistake of all. He tried to lie. "Sir, she was causing a scene," he said quickly. "She was being aggressive. She refused to leave. I was just following protocol." Imani's laugh was sharp, cutting. It sent a chill down Calvin's spine. "Protocol," she repeated, her voice sea-cold but laced with venom. Calvin refused to look at her. He couldn't. "Yes, sir," he continued, trying to sound composed. "She was—" Maxwell held up a hand. "Stop talking." Calvin immediately shut his mouth. Maxwell turned to the front desk, gesturing for a staff member. "Play the security footage." Now Calvin's stomach dropped. He felt like the cold floor was about to open up beneath him. "Sir, that's not necessary." Maxwell shot him a look that, and could have shattered glass. "I said play the footage." A few moments later, a staff member hurried over with a tablet. They tapped a few buttons, and soon a video feed from the hotel lobby security cameras disappeared. The footage didn't lie. It showed everything. Imani entering the hotel, politely requesting a room. Calvin smirking in at her, dismissing her, making insulting gestures. Calvin's voice filled with contempt, telling her she didn't belong. The say slap. The push. Imani falling. The my presidential suite keycard tumbling to the floor. Every single detail. Calvin felt the blood drain from his face. The moment the footage ended, the entire lobby was dead silent. Maxwell slowly turned to Calvin. "You're fired." Calvin's knees coleossed, buckled. "Sir, please." "No." Maxwell's voice was sharp-lead. "Sir, please." "No." Maxwell's voice was sharp, unwavering. "You don't get to beg. You don't get a second chance to explain yourself. You put your hands on a guest. You humiliated her. You assaulted her." Calvin was shaking now. His entire career was crashing down around him. "Sir, I swear I didn't mean to." Maxwell cut him off. "You don't belong in this industry. Get out." Calvin's world shattered. His hands trembled. His chest tightened. This was it. He had lost everything. He turned to Imani, desperation in his eyes. "Please," he whispered. "Please, I made a mistake." Imani folded her arms. "Oh, now it's a mistake." Her voice was sea-cold. "When you were slapping me, pushing me, insulting me because of my skin, was it a mistake then?" Calvin's lips parted, but no words came. "You enjoyed it." Imani's voice was deadly quiet. "You enjoyed humiliating me. You loved the power trip. But now you're scared." Maxwell took a deep breath, trying to contain his anger. "Miss Imani, we will take legal action against him if you wish. Assault is a crime, and I will personally ensure he faces the consequences." The entire Martini's lobby waited for Imani's response. But Imani, cool and collected, simply tilted her head. Then after a moment, she let out a soft chuckle. "No," she said finally. "No legal action. He's already lost his job. He's already drowning in regret." But her eyes locked onto Calvin. "You want me to spare you?" she asked. Calvin nodded frantically. "Yes, please. I swear I'll change. I swear I'll do anything." Imani's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Good. Then here's what I want." She conked and leaned in slightly. "You're going to enroll in an anti-racism camp. 2 months. Full-time. You're going to learn what it feels like to be on the other side of hate. And after that," her voice dropped to a whisper, "you're going to change." Calvin's breath was shaky. "And if I do that?" Imani stepped back. "Then maybe I'll consider telling Maxwell to give you another chance." Maxwell raised an eyebrow, but didn't protest. Calvin clung to that small hope. "I'll do it," he whispered. "I swear I'll do it." Imani studied him. Then she turned to Maxwell. "If you're okay with it, so am I," she said simply. Maxwell hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "If you think it's fair, I'll allow it," Imani smiled. Then, with the Evelyn and authority, she turned toward the elevator, her presidential suite key card still in hand, and just before stepping in she looked back at Calvin one last time. "See how the tables turned?" Then the elevator doors closed. And Calvin, for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be humbled. For the first time in his life, Calvin felt powerless. As the elevator doors closed, his knees nearly buckled beneath him. His throat was dry, his hands trembling. How did things turn so quickly? Just an hour ago he had been confident, smug, certain that he was in control. He had quite enjoyed making Imani feel small. He had taken pleasure in his authority, in dismissing her like she was nothing. But now he had been exposed, fired, and left with a choice. Imani's words echoed in his mind. You're going to enroll in an anti-racism camp, 2 months, full-time, and after that, you're going to change. Calvin had never felt such deep shame. Every whisper in the hotel lobby burned into his skin. He knew what they were saying. What a diss, Evelyn. What an idiot. What a racist fool. Maxwell had already called security to escort him out, but Calvin didn't fight it. He walked out of the hotel doors, stepping into the busy city streets. A changed man, but not changed for the better. Not yet. Calvin didn't know what to expect when he first walked into the anti-racism rehabilitation program. A large sign greeted him at the entrance. Understand before you judge. The building was nothing fancy, just a simple community center with a handful of classrooms, a library, and a few dormitories. Calvin shifted uncomfortably, carrying only a small bag of belongings. His arrogance, what was gone, replaced by a deep unease. He wasn't sure why he was here. He wasn't sure if he even wanted Hunt to be here, but he had no choice. Imani's condition was clear. 2 months, full-time, or no second chance. And despite everything, Calvin wanted that second chance. As he stepped inside, a woman in her mid-50s greeted him. Her warm smile and piercing eyes made him feel exposed. "Welcome," she said. "I'm Professor Evelyn. You must be Calvin." He nodded stiffly. She studied him for a long moment. "I assume you're here because you were given an ultimatum," she said bluntly. Calvin swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn folded her arms. "And do you think you're a racist, Calvin?" The question hit him hard. His first instinct was to say no. He had always told himself he wasn't racist. He just disliked certain people. But after everything that had happened at the hotel, he knew that was a weak excuse. I hesitated. "I don't know." Evelyn nodded, as if she expected that answer. "Then let's start with this. For the next 2 months, you're going to learn what racism truly is. You're going to see it, feel it, understand it. And when this program ends, I want you to tell me if you're still unsure." Calvin exhaled, already feeling like this was going to be harder than he imagined. For the first 2 weeks, Calvin hated and warmed every second of it. The program was intense. They watched real-life footage of hate crimes, listened to people who had been targeted, and sat through grueling lectures about the history of discrimination. They made him role-play scenarios where he had to experience racism firsthand. One day, they took him to a poverty-stricken neighborhood where Black and minority families had been forced to live due to systemic discrimination. A man named Lame, David Cole, who had been racially profiled and arrested unfairly at 17, spoke to the group. "I spent 10 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. You know why? Because a store owner said I looked suspicious. That's all it took." Calvin couldn't meet his eyes. "People like you," David continued, his voice full of restrained anger, "have the luxury as thieves of never worrying about things like that. You think racism is just a word, but for us, it's life or death." That night, Calvin lay awake in his dormitory, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Imani, how quickly he had judged her, how effortlessly he had dismissed her, and how much pain his actions could have caused. By the end of the first month, something inside Calvin began to crack. One day they made him do an experiment. He was given special glasses that darkened his skin in a way that made him appear black. Then he was sent to a high-end store. At first he thought it was silly, just a social experiment, but within minutes he felt it. The store staff watched on him. One of them followed him as he walked down the aisles. When he asked to see a luxury watch, the store clerk hesitated. "Are you sure?" they asked. The word stabbed him. It was the exact same thing he had done to Imani. For the first time in his life, he felt what it was like to be on the other side, and it devastated him. 2 months later, Calvin stood before Professor Evelyn. She studied him. "Do you still think you're not racist, Calvin?" Calvin took a deep breath. "No," he admitted. "I was. I didn't even realize it, but I was." Evelyn nodded. Then you're ready. Maxwell had been skeptical when Imani first suggested giving Calvin a second chance, but when he saw the changed man standing before him, Calvin with humility in his eyes, with a regretty in his voice, he agreed. Calvin got his job back, but this time he was different. He didn't just treat black guests equally. He would defend it on them. If he saw another staff member acting the way he once did, he stepped in. One day Imani received her call. It was Calvin. "Miss Imani," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you. You didn't have to give me another chance, but you did, and you changed my life. I'll never be the same person again." Imani smiled. "You got a second chance," she said. "Make it count." And from that day on, Calvin did exactly that. The world didn't need more apologies. It needed action. And for the first time in his life, Calvin was finally on the right side of history. The story of Aunt Imani and Willie became a powerful lesson for the world. News of the Undy Hotel incident and Willie's transformation spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with the debates, discussions, and reflections on how racism is often hidden in plain sight in hotels, stores, workplaces, and everyday encounters. Some people defended Chow. Calvin at first saying he didn't know better. It wasn't that serious, but others, including Imani, had a stronger message. Not knowing better is not an excuse. Change is always possible, but it has to start with accountability. Many black travelers who came forward sharing similar experiences of discrimination in luxury spaces. The hotel chains who gained and implemented new policies to educate staff on racial bias and fair treatment. But more importantly, Calvin's story became a symbol of how harmed people can change, how hate can turn into understanding, how ignorance can turn into awareness, and most of all, how one moment of injustice can lead to a movement for change. Imani never wanted revenge. She never wanted to destroy Willie. She wanted to teach a lesson, not just to him, but to the world, because racism isn't just about one bad person doing something wrong. It's about a system, a mindset, a culture that has been built over centuries. And if even one person like Willie could, that has been built over centuries. And if even one person like Willie could change, then maybe, just maybe, others could too.